Everyone, and welcome to another video. I'm Simply G, and today I'm doing, I guess, kind of a publisher spotlight. I got a bunch of books from one of my favorite kind of indie manga publishers, and so I will be going through all of those today ahead of my regular monthly haul video. So this is part review, part haul, if that makes sense. But I'll get straight into it, and I hope you guys enjoy. So I got an amazing package full of all of the different books that I had previously purchased as well as backed via crowdfunding for Glacier Bay Books. The team there very kindly put all of the books that I had left in orders together and sent them to me. A couple of these I'd been waiting for a while, and then others just were bits and pieces. But I made a larger order at the end of last month, and so it was a good opportunity to just bring everything together. And I finally received quite a few of these books. Some really excitingly I've been waiting for, and been waiting for the print edition. But first and foremost, we have two of the one-shots from this kind of ongoing series from Shinanosuke Saika. So we have Tonio, which is this green book here, and then One Strange Day, which is the more recent. There have been 2 or 3 previous releases as well. These follow sort of loosely interwoven stories about dreams and grief. They're really, really lovely, and the longer or the more of these that you read, you see how interwoven they are. I had been meaning to get Tonio for a little while, but just kind of fell behind on releases for a little bit, so it was good to finally get these two and continue on with this series, because I had previously really enjoyed the other entries into earlier entries into this larger body of work. Really worth checking out. Very much focused on kind of childhood and relationships between people, familial, very notably, and then that real emphasis of the boundary between kind of dreams and the afterlife, or dreams and communication between people. It's really lovely, and that kind of the boundary, or this idea of breaking through unseeable boundaries, can sometimes be a fairly regular theme through a lot of Glacier Bay's titles. So these just fit perfectly into that. It's a self-contained work, short and sweet. This is Saejima Asuka's Meet Me in the Unkempt Garden. This is a short comic about a woman who is having an affair with one of her young neighbors. Despite her marriage being fairly, there's nothing wrong with it, but the idea of being forced to become an adult and making decisions that are kind of expected, and this idea of a woman's role once she gets older, her escapism by having this affair, that's really what this book is about. And so further to that, this title is she goes to this somewhat, it's not abandoned, but where she's having this affair is this house, this property in her suburb that, since the death of the grandmother who used to also live there, the house has just kind of really fallen to pieces because this young neighbor that she's having an affair with is a hikikomori, basically. He doesn't go out. And so the garden itself is very unkempt, but she sees that as sort of her paradise. Being so unkempt means that she's able to hide away from the responsibilities of her real life. Yeah, not inherently a story about people making good choices, but I think there's certainly understandable elements to this, and I'm sure there's a lot of women who feel stuck in their situation and due to having made or felt pushed to make decisions about their lives whilst they were a lot younger, now trying to escape from what has become their reality. It's very poignant, and if you are able to enjoy nuanced explorations of women's roles and relationships with themselves and other people, then yeah, be sure to check this one out. We have the first volume of a longer series. This was going to be 3 volumes in all. This is Sayaka Mogi's Red Riding Hood's Wolf Apprentice Final Testament to the Moon. Now, the, I guess, parent story to this, which is Red Riding Hood's Wolf Apprentice, has actually been published by Kodansha in English, digital only, and a further spin-off. This is a direct sequel to that digital series, but a further spin-off called False Stars has also been released by Glacier Bay. They're all set in the same world, wherein there are humans, beastmen, and then hunters, or beastkin, I should say. This beautiful color pages from this book, and then a really lovely, magical, highly detailed delivery of this artwork. Our main character in this is the older twin between 2 werewolves who doesn't see himself as useful to his pack. And so in this first volume, he basically runs away until he comes face to face with a hunter. And then hopefully we see what comes from this, because hunters are obviously humans are like standard you, me, and everyone else watching. Beastkin are kind of like Ajin or whatever. They are humanoid animal people. They're a completely different culture. They also, I believe, eat humans, which is why they're seen as a threat. And then hunters are like a further race variation, who are, again, different from humans. They're stronger, therefore they can, hunt down beastkin. I have previously read Sayaka Mogi's works, both from Kodansha and Glacier Bay, for this title. It's a wonderfully magical setting, and if you enjoy things like Witch Hat Atelier is maybe that same kind of fantasy setting, it probably has more likeness to something like The King's Beast, wherein there are human animal like races like Ajin, or even Heterogenea Linguistico, which is much more slice of life fantasy setting. This is so far so good, and if you enjoyed the previous entries into the series, then I would encourage you to check this one out. Several books are short story collections, all from one author within each book. I've done a previous review video on this next book, so I'm not going to jump into like specifics for this, but I got the print edition of Omi Economies From This Flame beautifully, beautifully put together book. It also came with this print, which is just lovely, just gorgeously done. I really love the variation in art style in this particular collection of stories. There's such a fine and highly detailed, I mean, look at that. It's gorgeous. It just absolutely captures the atmosphere of every single different story. There's a lot of emphasis on relationships and motherhood, womanhood in these particular stories. So check out that previous review. I will link to it below as well. And if you are so interested, you can now get this book in print. Next book is Mitsuhashi Kotoro's The Carmen Line, which is just absolutely gorgeous. Each story in this really plays with the boundaries, especially the boundary, the actual Carmen Line, which is the boundary in the atmosphere, which is fairly arbitrary, but it's what scientists classify as the distinction between the atmosphere or the sky and space. So it really plays a lot with the boundary between sky and sea, and space and sea. It's just so beautifully done. Just really, really dreamy, really, really melancholic in a lot of places. And again, really reflective on relationships between people, the boundary between life and death, the boundary between the real and unreal. I'm not going to say that like the collection of stories are necessarily easy to unpack. I don't think any of these books are going to necessarily appeal to people who are more inclined to enjoy like the standard Shonen Jump fare. That's never been Glacier Bay's main audience, I don't think. But if you are a fan of more auteur works, things that have a little bit more introspection, it forces the reader to really connect and interrogate the works and to reflect on them themselves. These are the types of stories that can mean different things to different people. It doesn't necessarily have a clear-cut correct answer. And with this book in particular, it's just so beautiful. These are the kinds of stories that really, really appeal to me. All throughout this particular book, it's printed in blue ink, which gives such a beautiful lushness to, again, such settings that play with space and the sky and the ocean. Yeah, it's just absolutely, I don't want to say hypnotic, but there's a real ebb and flow to these stories, a softness that washes over you and allows you, if you are willing, to drift with it and to kind of enjoy the exploration and the journey without necessarily demanding answers. Because some of these things are more about that feeling in the moment and that reflection of the moment, rather than having a definite, this is what's happening, and you can only read it in one way. The Carmen Line is, all of these books are ones that every time Glacier Bay announces something, I'm excited for it, and I've yet to be let down by them. But this was just such a lovely, lovely release. There's silver foiling done for the title on this one. And if you are so interested, I'd highly recommend this one. It's a little less esoteric than maybe some of their other short story collections. Maybe not maybe I'm just biased. But really, really phenomenal book, and I really hope that we see some more from Mitsuhashi Kotaro, because this was just a beautiful experience. This is another short story collection. This is by Aaron Tuchka, A Favorable Wind on Full Sails. Now this book I think will be a little less... I think it's a little bit of a harder sell. This is a collection of short stories, obviously, but each of them are focused on... it has a very Garo-esque feel to it, which, if you know anything about Garo manga, will probably give you an indication of what the characters are like and what these stories are about. It's a little bit self-involved. Each of these stories kind of centers a guy who is a little, well, to put it harshly, I would say each story is about a self-obsessed loser whom demands the world revolve around them, even when they are in like very defeatist and self-deprecating mood. They demand attention from the world. That's putting it unkindly. But if you've read any Garo manga, I don't think that's that divisive of explanation, or that unique of an explanation for the types of works that you typically see from that magazine. To put it more kindly, I think these characters are very much, again, it's a reflection of this disillusioned young man. Typically men who have had a hard time or are having a hard time forging connections with other people, and thus have submit themselves to nihilism and really thrown away the world that doesn't allow them to succeed or celebrate them, maybe. And although I opened with kind of the unkind way of describing these characters, I don't think it's wrong for the exploration of this disillusionment of young men. It is a societal problem, and it is something that society really doesn't necessarily recognize the loneliness and the loss of strong relationships for young men, because there's an expectation of emotional or lack of emotional investment, right? The demands of toxic masculinity in society is for men to not forge emotional bonds necessarily, and not explore their emotional intelligence in the same way that women are kind of socially raised to do. And so this lack of connection, or this nihilism of community and of self, I think is sadly very relatable, and has been for decades for a lot of young men. I will also say that this is probably a little bit of a harder sell for general manga fans, even maybe indie manga fans, because the art style is certainly not what a lot of people think of when they think of manga. This definitely falls much more within the indie comics community. So it's one of those titles, it's one of those art styles that I can see a lot of people calling bad. Again, this is certainly not one that I think has wide appeal in the same way that some of the other Glacier Bay titles do. But it's one that, if you are a fan of Garo manga, of underground manga, of proper indie manga, not just general doujin, then it might be more your wheelhouse, but maybe don't go into this one blind. It has a similar feeling, less hope, but it has a similar feeling to something like Children of Moo Town, which is also released by Glacier Bay. Yeah, this really just, I think it showcases a lot of the disgruntlement of young men and the disconnect that can cause from the people in their life, or the reluctance to connect to the people in their life, the escapism with people they're familiar with, i.e. their peers, and then also this kind of reactive anger as well in this. It is very good. It's very well done. I did really enjoy this, and I do think it's a really powerful collection of stories. Again, I don't necessarily think it's for everyone, and I say that namely because I know that my viewing audience in particular is predominantly women, and therefore this kind of story might not appeal to you. And if that's the case, that's not wrong of you. But it is very well done for what type of story or story collection it is. Next is another short story collection, one that I was very excited for when it was initially announced, and I really enjoyed. This is a collection of stories by Tomohiro Sugawa. This is called Mermaid Town, and each of these are sort of an exploration of nightmares that the author has had. The initial setup, these are all kind of loosely interlinked, but the main character of this basically introduces the idea that they constantly have these trips within this kind of nightmare or dream realm, but more often than not, it is more of an unnerving experience rather than a euphoric experience. Some really fun, quirky settings over the course of the book. Each chapter is a fairly self-contained nightmare. Lots of words, as you can see. It's a very wordy collection of comics, but I really enjoy the style of this. There's no eyes for our main character, which kind of gives it that additional uneasiness that you might have with a dream that you're not exactly enjoying. Really, really well done. Just like with everything in this collection of books that I've shown so far, this is very much within Glacier Bay's wheelhouse of works. I find their choice and collation of anthologies like this so unique, so well done, and so just consistent. I think that if you do enjoy, again, sort of more alternative or indie manga, especially if you're someone who likes the idea of diving into things or experiences, even dreams or nightmares yourself that don't really necessarily make sense, but leave you with that kind of unease, and that once you've woken from that dream, you're not quite sure how to feel about it, or it might stay with you, because there are often times I think most people awake from a dream and you forget about it. And normally those are the good dreams you forget about, but the nightmares, the uneasy dreams are the ones that stay with us. And I think it's just really captured that feeling of unease and upheaval that your brain gets caught in when you are thrown into a situation that's just not quite right, and you recognize that you're in danger, or that there's some sort of looming threat that might not be immediately obvious, but is playing in your kind of fifth or sixth sense, and just twigging your memory a little bit. Really, really well done. I really like this cover in particular as well. I love the maroon and the bright blue. It's just lovely, lovely play of contrasts. And of course, the actual book itself. All of these books are just fantastic, real works of art within anyone's collection. Last but certainly not least, in fact, this may be the piece de resistance, we have Pandora by Hagiwara Rei. Glacier Bay has released Hagiwara Sensei's previous work, Ripples. There was a kind of standard print and then a Riso print edition. I, of course, own both. This is also a title, so this is the title that I backed and helped crowdfund. I was also silly and backed it twice, so I ended up with 2 copies. It's fine. The second copy has found a good home. But if you have never read any of Hagiwara Rei's stories, they're really kind of this experience of, again, these boundaries, but most notably the melancholy and the journey of grief. Now, this particular book is, I know that the team at Glacier Bay really holds this release in high regards, as they should, because it is beautifully done. They regard it as one of their best, if not their best, release to date. And you can understand why. Not only is it a large trim comic, as you can see, but it is full color, watercolor, just beautiful pieces, so atmospheric, so moody, so well done, high gloss paper, and you can't really see a lot of the subtleties of this particular book on camera, unfortunately, but it's just phenomenal, just far and beyond beautiful. So this was also, in addition to being a book that I helped crowdfund, it was also a title that the team very kindly sent a digital copy to me earlier in the month for me to give an unbiased review, as is always the case on this channel, an unbiased, truthful review. And so, knowing that this was a book that I had already purchased and was already going to read, I initially, I was going to read that digital edition, but kind of coincidentally, my print copy came to me anyway, and this was the first one that I read. Absolutely. It, like Ripples, there's a meditative feeling of this, but there's so much of this book that is the exploration of characters. And again, I called it the journey of grief, and I really do think that these characters, because again, this is a short story collection, each piece of this has characters who are going through the grieving and acceptance journey. There's a lot of sadness and reflection in a lot of Hagiwara's stories, and when you read the author's notes, Sensei mentions the Japanese earthquake, 3/11 disaster, which obviously happened more than 10 years ago now. And then later, a lot of these comics were written in 2020, so are a direct reaction to not only the 10-year anniversary of one of Japan's most recent disasters, huge loss of life, but also, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and the just absolute decimation of people and this breakdown of really society in a lot of parts of the world. And so globally, we are still I know there's a real push in this idea that the pandemic is over, which is not true. But the world itself is going through a grieving process. And I don't think a lot of people, individuals, but the global community has really had enough time to fully reflect on what we've lost. And and part of that, and part of what makes Hagiwara Rei's works so beautiful, is the kindness and the softness of which they allow the characters to come to terms with the sad realities, but sometimes and painful and beautiful parts of losing important people, and how the loss of someone can be devastating. Every life is completely unique, and there's no replacement for any one individual, right? And so when you lose someone, especially a close family member, or as a society, you lose so many people in such a shocking and horrific and fast way, whether it be through natural disaster or from medical disaster. There has to be a process of understanding and exploration and being upset and angry and, having these parts of your life and parts of society. These eventually make you question the world that you live in, the community or the country that you live in, but also helping you figure out how to improve that, and also recognizing that, every life lived is valuable. And although we lose people, and although it's a painful experience, and although it's something that sometimes can never heal, it doesn't mean that you as a person will never be able to move past that. And it also doesn't, part of the really beautiful, important part of this book is that I would say most people who have died, family members and that, don't want the people left behind to be grieving their loss for the rest of their life, right? That acceptance journey is something that is so important for people to hear. There's a particular short story in this collection where a woman blames herself for the death of a child, right? And so when our character, through sort of a dreamlike maze, meets the child character, or, the afterlife ghost of, or soul of this child character, and asks them the question of like, oh, this woman is so regretful for what happened. She blames herself for your death, do you forgive her? That the child says, I don't know if I can forgive this person because I don't remember inherently what happened, but I also don't want them to stay sad, right? Like, sometimes there's a process of forgiveness, and for a lot of people that's really important, but also sometimes there's needs to be a process of forgiveness of yourself, more importantly, than from another person. And although the difficulty of confronting and living with painful and bad decisions is so hard, right? It's also your duty as someone who's survived to not only remember the people who we've lost, but to remember yourself and to care for yourself just as much as you cared for that other person who has passed away. And I think that those messages are something that we are just now, or we as a society that is still grieving, need to hear. It's hard because there's so much like political debate around COVID in particular, and I am certainly not one to encourage like, oh, let people believe what they want. In regards to like anti-vaxxers, I do think that that's a huge disservice to the entire community. There sometimes is a call for the sacrifice for the greater good. And by that, I mean making decisions for the greater good of the community, even if it doesn't completely subscribe to your personal beliefs. Get your vaccinations is what I'm saying. Don't get your vaccinations. But not everyone who has been harmed by anti-vax rhetoric and by anti-vax belief is a bad person. Are people who subscribe to those beliefs or are in a position to challenge those beliefs. It's really, really hard, right? And I think there needs to be a level of grace and understanding, and it's in the Western English-speaking world in particular, but in the wider Western world, and more specifically the U.S., not entirely the U.S., because it really is the entirety of the English-speaking world. There's so much divide between belief systems and political sides and all these things, and it's meant that general grace and care and sympathy and empathy for people outside of our own communities or who've made decisions that we don't agree with can mean that people fall into really cruel and unnecessary rhetoric. Again, I don't think that I don't want to get into like a political debate about this comic because it's not that, but I do think that right now, we being the world and notably, Western English-speaking society are in a very fragile position, where we've had so much hurt over the last several years. And we haven't had the opportunity to heal and grow from that. We really haven't had any kind of recovery from that at all. And unfortunately, because of the horrific realities of late stage capitalism, there really isn't any support for that to stop, right? And I don't think there will be a true coming to terms with loss in the same way that humankind might have been able to do previously. Yeah, it's a sticky and complicated issue, but I think that this particular collection of short stories is so emblematic of life right now. But in the same way, it's also extremely, extremely timeless. You know, the human emotion of grief and sadness and relief and search for acceptance is universal. It's existed since humans have had emotions. And so I think that if you are someone who enjoys a melancholy story, with hope, it's a hopeful collection as well, then definitely get this book. It is beyond beautiful. It is so lovely, and it's done really. If you are familiar with Glacier Bay's titles, it's sort of the same trim size of Glaiolia, their previous anthology series, and yeah, just absolutely beautiful book. Just beyond, just get it. It's so lovely. For all the beautiful, phenomenal new books from Glacier Bay that I received this month, I'll also include them in my haul video, but when I received this package, I knew that I wanted to do a actual spotlight of these various books and this particular publisher. I've done publisher spotlights for Glacier Bay in the past, but honestly, they are one of the best, if not the best, especially within the indie publishing scene. I really think that it's a credit to their team in how phenomenally they continue to release their books. There's such a wide variety of stories that they release, and I just love supporting such a passionate and interesting and exciting small publisher. So be sure to check them out. They are based in the US. You can buy their books direct from their website, which I will link down below. There's also some European comic shops that you can purchase their books from, as well as like various small indie bookstores. I'm not completely across that. Obviously, I have to purchase from the website. But yes, if you are a fan or are interested in less run-of-the-mill manga releases, if you enjoy boutique publishing and independent and small press publishing, then be sure to check out Glacier Bay. Follow them on social media, and yeah, absolutely check out their work, including the titles that I talked about today. But that's everything. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening to my thoughts and feelings of all of the titles in this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye till then.